Welcome to another wonderful Brenda Maxfield audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Amish Romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Brenda Maxfield, Amish Romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. Escaping ACRE'S Corner is Book 2 in a 3-part series called Annie's Story. And now, Escaping ACRE'S Corner. Chapter 1. In whose hand is the soul of every living thing, and the breath of all mankind. Job 12 verse 10, King James Version. Sarah braced herself against every bump in the road, determined not to move. Not to jiggle. Hardly to breathe. She'd been torn from her home, forced to exile in Ohio at her cousin Isabel's house, but that didn't mean she had to go willingly. Or politely. Or even alive. Not alive? She snorted inwardly at such a stupid thought. But still. Her hands instinctively went to her stomach, resting on the hardly perceptible bump. She had a baby to think of now. She glanced out of the corner of her eye at her sister Annie. Annie's eyes were still wider than usual, and Sarah watched to make sure she was even blinking. Yes, there it was. Her sister's excitement was palpable, but Sarah didn't like the taste of it. She wanted to spit. In truth, Sarah wanted to scream and yell and cry. But she didn't. She was done with that. Instead, she conserved her energy, her mind spinning with ideas. Plots. Schemes. Call them by whatever name you liked, Sarah had no intention of following her dad's insane plan. Inwardly, she seethed. She still couldn't believe her dad was trying to force her to give her baby to Annie and Amos. Merciless. Not to mention heartless. Sarah pressed her lips tightly together, willing herself not to say anything stupid or suspicious. Truth be told, when the trip to Ohio had begun 2 hours earlier, she'd pretended to be glad that Annie would be raising her child. Wait, her child? No. It's Eric's child, too. Sarah's stomach cramped, and she sucked in her breath before she could stop herself. Sarah? Annie asked, her gaze intent. Are you all right? Is something wrong? Sarah took a slow breath, and the pain subsided. I'm fine, she said, surprised at how normal her voice sounded. A bit tired. Annie shifted and faced her more squarely. Shall I tell the driver to stop? Do you want to get out and stretch a bit? No. I'm fine. I told you. Impatience seeped into her voice, and she quickly gave Annie a smile. Don't fret so. Annie's brow furrowed. I can't help it. I promised Ma'am I'd take care of you. Are you hungry? She began to rustle in the bag of food she'd brought along. Sarah put her hand on Annie's arm. I'm not hungry. I'm fine. Annie stopped digging. All right. She set the cloth bag that Ma'am had stuffed full of food on the seat between them. Let me know if you change your mind. Sarah nodded and resumed staring out the window. The landscape rushed by in a blur, but Sarah no longer marveled at such speed. She'd ridden in cars plenty of times over the last few months. She'd been justified, too, since she was in her Rumspringa. She closed her eyes and exhaled. Well, that was over now. It was her fault, and she knew it. She wasn't as deluded as that. She and Eric had consummated their love too early, and there was no taking it back. She straightened her shoulders. She didn't want to take it back. She loved Eric. With every ounce of her being, she loved him. But she'd made a mess of things, for sure and for certain. Dat and Ma'am had sent her off to protect her. She shook her head and scoffed softly. More like to protect themselves. As if sending her away would do any good, Sarah knew how the gossip chain worked. She predicted that the whole community of Hollybrook would know her condition within 2 weeks. 3 weeks, tops. Annie's tension made Sarah itch. She knew her sister was over the moon excited about this baby. She and Amos had been trying for years to get in the family way, and with no luck. Poor Annie. It didn't help that nearly every of-age married woman in Hollybrook was expecting. Or so it seemed. And then to have her little sister up and get pregnant without being married. Sarah could only imagine the anguish she'd caused Annie. But now? Now, Sarah was the hero because Annie was going to get the baby to raise as her own. That's absurd idea. An hour more, the Mennonite driver called over his shoulder. You girls doing okay? Annie smiled. We're doing fine, thank you. She turned to Sarah. Only another hour. Sarah nodded. Annie reached over and gave Sarah's hand a squeeze. Sarah squeezed back, mainly to allay suspicion. She wanted to give Annie no reason to question what thoughts might be whizzing through her head. The last hour passed without incident. When the driver pulled off the main highway and started winding through the back roads to get to Cousin Isabel's house in ACRE'S Corner, Sarah perked up. She focused hard at each passing landmark, attempting to memorize her way to Isabel's house. She fully intended to use her knowledge to find her way right back out. She wasn't sure how. She wasn't sure when. But she was sure. Chapter 2. The driver turned into a long drive and approached a large white farmhouse with 6 rockers lined up on the front porch. Sarah hadn't been there for years, but she would always remember the number of rockers on Isabel's porch. She knew that every evening during the summer, they were full. Her relatives would sit there, rocking gently as they either knitted, sewed, or like Cousin Andrew, smoked a pipe. At least that's what always happened when she was visiting. We're here, Annie said. She gathered up her various bags and barely waited for the van to stop before she plunged outside. She glanced back at Sarah with a hesitant look. Quit studying me all the time, Sarah snapped. She instantly regretted her harsh words and put on a contrite smile. What had happened to her resolution to stay calm? Annie flinched. Oh, I'm sorry, Sarah. Truly. The front screen flapped open, hitting the side of the house. Cousin Isabel and 3 little girls trundled out the front door. You're here! Isabel cried, moving down the steps with surprising ease, considering she was balancing a baby on her hip. We're here, Annie answered. Sarah climbed out slowly, arranging her face in a pleasant smile. Hello, Isabel. She looked down at the 3 little ones who had suddenly become shy and were partially hidden behind their mama's skirt. Hello, young ones, Sarah continued. Her heart pinched as she studied the kinner. Her hand began to go to her stomach, but she stopped herself. The driver was busy unloading their suitcases. He carried them to the porch and then turned to Annie. Is that all, miss? Annie nodded. Dat paid you, right? It's all taken care of. You 2 have a nice visit now. He touched his eyebrow in farewell and got back into the van and drove away. A moment of awkward silence ensued. Then Isabel shifted her baby from one hip to the other. Let's get you settled then. She led them back inside the house. Sarah stood just inside the door, taking it all in. The front room was considerably larger than theirs, as was the kitchen and dining area. It was sparsely furnished, but the pieces were heavy and showed excellent craftsmanship. Sarah had the fleeting thought that Annie's husband, Amos, Would like to chat with the man who had made such fine pieces. There was a pile of wooden toys on the braided rug in front of the warming stove. Sarah craned her neck and peered inside the mud room at the side entrance. A row of boots was lined up with all toes pointing toward the wall. A thick towel lay over the rim of the sink and a chunk of lye soap sat next to the faucet. Sarah? Annie questioned. Sarah flinched. Jaw. What do you think? Sarah's face grew hot. Had Annie been talking to her? Her focus was off, way off. Ever since she found out she was with child, she couldn't seem to concentrate more than a few minutes at a time. About what? She asked sheepishly. Annie's brows drew together. Would you like a bit of food first, or do you want to go on upstairs and unpack? Sarah swallowed and mentally measured her level of nausea. Perhaps a bit of food would do nicely. I'd like to eat something first, she said. Wonderful, Isabel said. Sarah and Annie, come sit down. Girls, go wash your hands. The three little ones scrambled into the washroom, and Sarah heard them scrape the wooden steps tool up to the sink so they could reach. She looked forward to getting to know them better, they seemed so precious. Then she frowned. What was she thinking? She wouldn't be getting to know them better at all. She didn't plan on staying long enough. Perhaps we should wash up, too, Annie stated. We were hours in the van. Sarah joined Annie at the kitchen sink. They washed up quickly and returned to the table as the girls organized themselves on one of the long wooden benches. I've got fresh banana bread and some canned peaches. I hope that will suit. Sarah looked at her cousin. It will suit fine. After their snack, Isabel led them upstairs. There were 6 bedrooms, all of ample size. Isabel's family presently occupied 3 of the rooms. I didn't know if you wanted to share, Isabel said, pushing open the door to a room with a double bed, a tall dresser, and numerous pegs along the wall. I made up 2 of the rooms just in case. Sally, the oldest of the 3 girls, stood in the middle of the room staring at Sarah with large blue eyes. Annie stepped forward and patted her on the head. We're so happy to get to stay with you for a while. But Sally paid no mind to Annie. She kept staring at Sarah, her tumbling blonde curls hugging her neck. Isabel cleared her throat. Sally, run along now. Go tend to your sisters. Sally pursed her lips and ran off, calling, Mary. Phoebe. Let's play downstairs. She's so sweet, Annie commented, setting her suitcase on the bed. Ja, and a big help, too. Isabel handed her baby to Annie. So, you're wanting to share rooms? Sarah's mind spun. If she shared a room with Annie, it would make her getaway that much more difficult. If she had her own room, she could be gone for hours before anyone was the wiser. I'd like to have my own room, if that's all right, she murmured. Annie's gaze flew to her. Really? But it would be like old times to share a room. It's not old times, though, is it? Sarah asked. Isabel's eyes widened, and she looked uncomfortable, but she recovered quickly. Your own room is fine. As I said, I freshened up 2 rooms. Sarah knew Annie was hurt, but there was nothing to be done about it. She could see that her sister was going to be much too clingy for her taste. Might as well put some distance between them from the start. Sarah bent down to pick up her suitcase again. A flicker of sorrow flashed through her. She and Annie had happily shared a room until Annie had married and moved into the Dottie house. They'd gotten along fine. And at first, after Annie moved out to join Amos, Sarah had missed her something fierce. But it wasn't old times, was it? Hadn't she just said as much? Sarah's burning need for privacy was something new. As a general rule, there wasn't much privacy to be had in Amish homes. Most shared their bedrooms with a passel of siblings. So where did this urgent need come from? Sarah clasped her suitcase more firmly. Perhaps she had adopted more of the English ways than she'd thought. Annie, would you hold the baby for another minute or two? Isabel asked. Annie was more than willing to accommodate, and she said so. Thank you. Come on then, Sarah, and I'll show you to your room. Isabel went back into the hall and indicated the door adjacent to Annie's. Here you are. Sarah walked into the room, noting that the wooden floors creaked with each step. She'd have to learn where to place her weight if she wanted to move about in secret. The bed was narrow and had a beautiful pink and green quilt spread over it. A small rag rug lay next to the bed, and a tall dresser, similar to the one in Annie's room, flanked the side of the window. This is fine, Sarah said. Thank you, Isabel. Isabel peered out into the hall and then shut the door quietly. She turned to Sarah. Are you all right? Sarah had wondered when Isabel would question her, but it had happened sooner than she'd anticipated. She felt a slow heat come to her cheeks. Jaw. Andrew and I do have a request. Sarah raised her brows. A request? She hadn't expected that at all. But since they had taken her in, she could hardly refuse. What is it? Our girls are young, it's true. So they wouldn't understand a lot of things. But even so, we don't want them, well, Isabel paused. Sarah's heart fell. So, that was it. You don't want me talking to them? You don't want me influencing them? Isabel put up her hand. No. Not that. Sarah sucked air. Then what? Don't be talking about how you don't have a husband, all right? I'm not asking you to lie. We just don't want them knowing everything. Since Isabel's daughters were 7 and younger, Sarah couldn't remember exactly. It was hardly likely she'd be telling them any details. Her skin went even hotter. How foolish did her cousin think she was? She sank to the edge of the bed. Of course, she managed to eke out. A surge of irritation swept through her. None of this was her idea. It was Dad's fault she was there, imposing on her cousin's family and interrupting their lives. Isabel put her hand on the doorknob and then looked back over her shoulder at Sarah. Your father didn't give us the full story. I'm sure you understand that we can't help but wonder. You have asked God for forgiveness, then? You've spoken with your bishop. Sarah's chest tightened, and she worked to keep her tone even. I'm tired, cousin. I wonder if we might talk about this later. Isabel fluttered her lashes and seemed a bit abashed. Of course. I should have realized. You rest now, Sarah. Supper will be at 6. Sarah nodded and lay back on the bed, so Isabel could see just how tired she was. But when her cousin left and closed the door behind her, Sarah sat back up. Her throat burned with indignation. This was going to be worse than she'd imagined, and she'd imagined it bad. She stepped to the window and attempted to view the road. Unfortunately, there were large willows throughout the front yard, blocking her view. She flattened her hands on the window pane and leaned into the glass. If she pressed her face flat against the cool surface, she could almost see a bit of road to the right. She sighed and backed away. It was no use. She'd have to go down there to get a better look. Surely, there was a phone shanty in the area. She opened her suitcase and dug around until she found her small purse of coins. She knew how to operate a public phone. She had used one in the center of Hollybrook when she'd made a call to the Miller's barn. Isaiah Miller had answered and acted as if he was about to drop the phone when her voice came on the line. But it was a legitimate business call. She was checking to see if he could supply honey for her friend's booth at the local farmer's market. Sarah smiled thinking about it. Martha and wouldn't touch the phone, saying her dad would have a fit if he found out. Sarah had argued that business calls were all right, but Martha and had turned her back with a flourish, crossing her arms indignantly. So, Sarah had ended up calling Isaiah Miller for her. Which, of course, hadn't bothered Sarah at all. Sarah took a few coins and pushed them into the waist of her dress. She had no idea if the phone shanty would be a public phone or a regular phone. If it was a regular phone, she wouldn't have to worry about slipping coins into it. The farmers in the area could be sharing the bill, and if they were, she could simply pick up the phone and make a call. She fretted a bit, though, because her call would be long distance. She knew enough about area codes, so that wasn't the problem. What she didn't know was whether the farmers would figure out who had made the call when the bill came due. She grabbed the end post of the bed and grimaced. If she was English, she'd have her own cell phone and this wouldn't be an issue. Yet another reason to give up her Amish ways. She pulled off her cap and undid the bun at the nape of her neck. Her long chestnut hair fell over her shoulders like a waterfall. She ran her fingers through its soft silkiness. Absently, she twisted a lock around her finger as she thought of Eric. Soon, she whispered. Soon, we'll be back together. Someone rapped lightly on her door, and she went to answer it. Annie looked in, her eyes slightly red. You been crying? Sarah asked. Annie bustled into the room and sat on the bed. Not much, she said. I wanted to know if you'd like to stretch your legs a bit. Maybe take a walk or ask Isabel if we can be of help with some chores. Sarah's brows rose. Was it to be this easy? I'd love to take a walk, she said, delighted that she'd be able to scope out the land and look for a shanty. Annie nodded and stood. Good. That's real good. I'll tell Isabel. Shall we ask the girls to come along? Sarah stiffened. No. I don't think it's a good idea. But I'm sure they'd love to go with us. Annie. Her voice was so solemn that Annie's face crunched into worry. What is it? Isabel and Andrew aren't keen on me spending time with the girls. Annie looked at Sarah with sorrow. Oh, she said softly. I see. Jaw. Great, isn't it? I'm supposed to be here for months, and they don't want me here. No, I'm sure that's not true, Annie interjected. Save your reassurances, Sarah said. I get it. They don't want me poisoning their daughters' minds. Oh, Sarah. How you phrase things. I'm sure it's not true. It is too, Annie, and you know it. Why Dad thought this would work out is beyond me. A look of fear covered Annie's face. But it will work out. Everything's going to be fine. You'll see. Sarah studied her sister. Annie wanted her baby badly. So whether Annie was concerned for her right then or only for the baby was anyone's guess. Sarah figured Annie's concern was mainly about the baby. Getting it born safely and back to Hollybrook where Annie would set up a nursery in the Dotty house. And then, for the rest of time, Annie and Amos could fuss over the baby like it was theirs. Which it would be, according to Dad. A wave of determination surged through Sarah. The sooner she called Eric the better. Come on, Sarah said. Let's go on that walk. Pin your hair back up first, Sarah. With a sigh, Sarah twisted her curls back into a tight bun and pinned her cap in place. Annie followed her out of the bedroom and back downstairs. Neither of them mentioned taking the girls with them. Isabel waved them off, assuring them that the next day was soon enough to start helping with the chores. The air was crisp, and Sarah pulled her cape around herself more tightly. Annie wore a black coat and a scarf. Sarah was glad to see it as she knew Annie chilled more easily than most, she always had. Do you want my scarf? Annie asked her. No. You need it more than I do. But I don't want you taking cold. Annie shivered. I didn't realize it was so bitter, or I might not have suggested a walk. It's good to get out, Sarah insisted. She scanned the fallow fields, searching for a phone shanty. Nothing so far, but there was a bend in the road ahead. Perhaps she'd see one tucked around the corner. She kicked a stone on the road, and it skittered ahead of them. She continued to kick it until they rounded the curve. And there, standing like an open invitation, was a phone shanty. Sarah bit her lip to contain her excitement. It wasn't even that far from her cousin's house. She glanced around. There were 2 farmhouses within sight, but both were somewhat obscured by large trees in their yards. Sarah smiled. It wasn't going to be hard at all to make a call to Eric. "Shall we head back?" she suggested. Annie blew out her breath, making a puff of white mist. Let's. I don't know what I was thinking." Sarah laughed, her mood immeasurably lifted. Maybe it won't be so bad here after all. Annie glanced at her. "Really? I'm glad to hear you say that. And being with Isabel's whole family will be wonderful good." Sarah hadn't thought beyond Isabel, her husband, or their 4 girls. For some reason, she forgot other relatives were living in ACRE'S corner. There were other cousins, her aunt and uncle, plus her uncle's younger brother. She supposed they all knew her sordid story. "If we hurry, we can help Isabel prepare supper. She told us not to worry about chores today," Sarah said. "Slow down, Annie. We don't need to run." Truth be told, Sarah felt like running herself. The sooner she could get rid of Annie, the sooner she could sneak back and use the phone. She wasn't foolish, though. She knew that 2 Amish strangers running down the road would call attention faster than standing atop a chair at a preaching service. She grabbed Annie's arm to slow her down, and the 2 of them walked with perfect decorum back to Isabel's house. Chapter 3. Sarah bided her time until the entire family had retired to the front room to play board games. Of course, the little ones played their own version on the floor, which basically meant Isabel fussing at the girls to keep them from chewing or even eating any of the checkers. "You'll join us?" Annie asked Sarah, getting up from the couch and coming to her. "No. I think I might take a rest." Annie immediately looked concerned, but Sarah reassured her. "Quit fretting, Annie. I just want to lie down a bit." Annie gave her a sheepish smile. "Sorry. I can't help but fret, but I'll do better at controlling myself. You'll see. I promise. Have a good rest then." Annie went back in to rejoin the family. Sarah hung about a minute, making sure everyone was involved and well settled. Then she crept to the side washroom and slipped on her cape. She saw a flashlight hanging on a peg and grabbed it. With cat-like movements, she opened the side door and tiptoed outside. She shut the door behind her carefully and headed down the gravel path to the street. She didn't dare turn on the flashlight until she was well on her way. The last thing she wanted was someone in the house to notice her light bobbing its way down the road. Once out of sight of the house, she increased her pace, flipping on the light and staying to the edge of the road. There were no cars about, and even better, no buggies. She wasn't keen on answering anyone's questions that evening. It took her 15 minutes to arrive at the shanty. She looked furtively around but saw no one. The wooden door creaked as she opened it and stepped inside. The small space was cold and still and gave her an empty feeling. She shuddered and scolded herself for being silly. Why should a person feel lonesome just because they were standing in a phone shanty? But Sarah knew the shanty had nothing to do with it. She was in Ohio with relatives who didn't want her there. She was carrying the child of the boy she loved with all her heart. She was being forced to give her baby away. An overwhelming feeling of sadness enveloped her, and she sucked in air, leaning hard against the back wall of the shanty. She allowed herself a minute to despair, and then she straightened her shoulders and shined the flashlight on the phone. It was a regular telephone, no coins required. She wondered whether she should leave some money on the small wooden shelf after she made her call. She wasn't of the mind to use the phone and create a long-distance charge without paying for it. But if she left money there, it would be found, and the questions would start. It wouldn't be long before it was discovered that she was the one who had used the phone. Leaving money was out of the question. Feeling beholden to the neighbors who provided the phone, she picked up the receiver. She knew Eric's cell number by heart, and he'd told her to be sure to include the first 3 numbers of his area code and to press the number 1 first. Which she did. In seconds, his phone was ringing. "Hello? Eric?" There was a shuffling noise. "Sarah? Is that you?" "It's me." Tears filled her eyes as she heard his warm, deep voice. "Where are you? Did you get to Ohio?" She clasped the phone, cupping the speaking end around her mouth like a hug. "I'm in Ohio." "But whose phone are you using?" "I'm in a phone shanty not far from my cousin's house. It didn't take me long at all to get here." "Does your sister know you're calling?" "No. Of course not. She'd be upset. Give me a sec." Sarah heard more shuffling and a door slam. "Okay. I'm in my room now. How are you?" "I'm fine. More important, how are you?" Tears slid down her cheeks when she heard the concern and love in his voice. "I'm okay." "Did you tell your parents?" "No way. Not until it's done." "But how can we do it?" "I thought you said it wasn't legal." "We'll lie, that's how." Sarah gripped the phone more tightly. "But, lying?" "I don't know." Sarah gulped past the lump in her throat. Why was she so worried about lying when she'd already broken the biggest rule of all? It made no sense. Yet in her mind, she saw her dad's censuring eye. "It's the only way," Eric continued. "And I'm 18. But I'm not." "I know." Eric was silent for a moment before continuing. "But you're 17, so I think we'll be okay. Did you know a person in Indiana can get married at 15? How do you even know that?" "I looked it up on the internet." He paused. "But you need your parents' consent." Sarah blew out her breath. "Then, it's impossible." "Nothing's impossible, Sarah." "Nothing. Don't you forget that." "But they'll never sign." "Then we'll forge their names." "Eric, you want to be with me, don't you?" "More than anything," she answered in a whisper. Her fingers were clammy around the phone. "Then trust me. I'll figure it all out. We'll be married, and then we'll tell my folks. They'll come around. They're nice people, Sarah." Sarah's stomach gurgled, and she felt a tightness move through her. Lying and now forging her parents' names? She would be rejected forever. Forever? Is that what she wanted? She couldn't be shunned since she hadn't yet joined church. But this would be the same thing without the label. For sure and for certain. Forging ahead would cut her off from her family for all time. "You still there?" came Eric's voice. "Ja," she murmured. Her mind spun with the ramifications. "Tell me exactly where you are." She looked around the dark fields and then peered upward through the shanty's window into the clear night sky. It was odd to think that she was gazing at the same stars that were shining down on her home in Hollybrook at the very same moment. "I'll get you the street address tomorrow," she said. "I'll look on the mailbox." Or Annie has Isabel's address written down. I saw her show the paper to the driver. Okay. You might have to give me till the weekend, but I'll come for you, okay? She nodded, crying again, but unsure why. Eric was coming for her. Isn't that what she wanted? He'd take care of her. They could keep their baby and raise it together. You'll call me tomorrow then? Ja, I'll call you tomorrow. I love you, Sarah. Her breath went jagged as she closed her eyes and let his words wash over her. I love you, too, she choked out. She hung up the phone, placing the receiver slowly back in its cradle. She shifted her weight and the flashlight slipped off the shelf and clunked to the floor. She bent down, her hand shaking as she retrieved it. She pushed out from the shanty and hurried back to the road. She prayed Annie hadn't discovered her absence. If she found out, it would make everything so much harder. She walked quickly, her heavy black shoes beating out a muffled rhythm on the asphalt road. With every step she took, she saw the image of her dad staring at her with infinite sadness in his eyes. Sarah slipped in the side door, rehung the flashlight, and shed her cape, placing it firmly on the waiting peg. She took a few tentative steps through the kitchen, pausing in the doorframe. She heard laughter and animated chatting coming from the front room. She let out her breath. Good. They were still in there, and hopefully none the wiser that she had sneaked out. She continued through the dining area and was about to head up the stairs when Annie called out from the front room. Sarah? Is that you? Are you up? Sarah stopped, her heart pounding. She took a slow, deep breath and walked into the front room. Ja, it's me. Did you have a good rest? Do you need anything? Sarah shook her head. Were you in the kitchen? Are you hungry? She shook her head again. Just thirsty. I wanted a drink of water. All right. Do you want to join us? Sarah gave a weak smile. Was she to become a habitual liar now? How easily the false words slithered from her lips. No. But thanks. Annie's head lowered a moment before she put on a cheery expression. Okay. Do you want me to check in on you before I go to bed? Sarah's lips puckered with annoyance. She hardly needed a babysitter. I'm fine, she said, more harshly than she intended. Both Isabel and Andrew shifted in their chairs. Sarah saw the look of judgment on their faces as they glanced at each other and then at her. She widened her eyes and her lips curled into a tight smile. You can do this, Sarah. Oh, that sounded rude, she said, injecting warmth into her tone. I'm a bit tired. I'll see all of you in the morning. Annie visibly relaxed. Sleep well, our Sarah. Sarah nodded, her feet itching to get out of there. She turned and fled up the stairs. In her room, she unpacked a few items of clothing. It wouldn't do for her to keep everything packed, Annie would wonder. So she set some of her things conspicuously on the top of the dresser and hung others on the pegs. Of course, she left her English clothes hidden in the bottom of her bag. She changed into her nightgown, aware of each creaking board as she moved about the room. At least she hadn't lied about being tired. She was so exhausted that her nerves throbbed. Within moments, she'd snuffed out the lantern and snuggled deeply into bed. She and Eric would have to make detailed plans. He couldn't just drive up to the porch and pick her up. Eric. 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 She couldn't wait to see him again. She thought of his deep gray eyes and the way his lips quivered before turning up in a smile. She thought of the way he said her name, as if it were a caress. She couldn't go on, her mind had become fuzzy and sleep couldn't be denied any longer. Sarah. Annie stood over her bed and said her name gently. Sarah stirred and then bolted into a sitting position. What? What's happened? Annie touched her shoulder. Nothing. Everything's fine. Then what are you doing in here? Sarah pressed her hands to her chest. Her heart was racing as if she'd been pulled from a runaway horse. Oh, I'm sorry to startle you, but it's time to rise. Isabel's been up for a while, and we need to go help her. Sarah worked to slow her breathing. I thought something had happened, she muttered. No. But we have to earn our keep here, Sarah. Sarah shoved the covers off her legs. I know that. So, you'll be down soon? Annie asked. Sarah looked at her sister in the dim morning light. I'll be down. Annie left the room. Sarah stared at the closed door and blew out her breath. She'd been in a deep sleep and now felt disoriented. Hanging her legs over the side of the bed, she felt the cold floor with her feet. She ran her toes over the smooth wood until she felt steady enough to get up. She shook her head. She'd never been one to sleep in, so it was odd that Annie had been forced to awaken her. Was sleeping too long a symptom of pregnancy? She stood and thrust her shoulders back in a stiff stance. When did pregnancy begin to show? She looked down at her shadowy silhouette. Her stomach was still mostly flat. It was hard to believe that inside there was a child growing. A child who would arrive in mere months. A child who would need love and care and safety. Sarah ran her hands over her stomach. I'm going to take care of you, little one. You'll see. I'll be the best mama you could ever have. Me and Eric. We'll take care of you, she whispered. As she spoke to her baby, she was aware that right downstairs was her sister Annie, probably bustling about the kitchen helping Isabel. Annie, who thought she was going to raise the baby. Annie, who thought she was going to be the baby's mama. A twinge of regret yanked at Sarah's conscience. She hated to take the baby from her sister, she truly did. But it wasn't Annie's baby. It was hers. Still, the regret remained. She knew how badly Annie wanted a baby. How odd that God had given one to her instead. She shuddered. Had God given her this baby? Or had sin given her this baby? She frowned. Sometimes, she didn't know what to think. She looked down at her stomach. Either way, it's not your fault, is it? She asked. She stood still for a long moment, as if expecting the baby to answer. Sarah watched all day, waiting for a chance to sneak off to the phone shanty, but it seemed that every time she turned around, Annie was there. Not exactly hovering, but there all the same. I may take a walk later, Sarah said during the late afternoon. I'll be happy to come with you, Annie offered. It's cold out. I know how you get. Sarah smiled. I'll go by myself. Annie grimaced. It's not that cold. I'd like to come. I don't think you should be walking around by yourself. Why ever not? I'm perfectly capable of taking a walk without your help. I know that. I told Ma'am that I would. What? Sarah interrupted. That you wouldn't let me out of your sight? Is that what you told her? Of course not, Annie said, sounding annoyed. I just told her I'd watch out for you. And how can I watch out for you if you're not in my sight? Sarah plopped down onto a dining room chair. So you're planning to watch me for the next 6 months? I won't be able to do anything without you. That's not what I meant, Annie said, looking deflated. I just want to make sure you're all right. You mean you want to be sure the baby's all right? Isn't that the real truth? Sarah knew she'd gone too far the instant the words were out of her mouth. And to make matters worse, Isabel chose that very moment to walk into the dining area. She stopped short and stared at them both. Oh, Isabel, Annie said, scrambling to continue setting the table. Her face was red, and she looked as if she'd gotten caught stealing cookies. We've almost got the table ready. Sarah wanted to swallow her tongue. What was wrong with her? Spouting off every other second like the devil himself controlled her mouth. It wasn't Annie's fault that she was in this position. Nor was it Isabel's. And the fact that Isabel had heard them squabbling would only serve to make her dislike Sarah more. Sorry, Isabel, Sarah muttered. She fled into the washroom and grabbed her cape from the peg. I'll be back soon, she said with a pointed look at Annie. Annie nodded, putting on a forced smile. Isabel said nothing. She simply turned on her heel and marched back into the kitchen. Sarah hated to admit it, but it was too cold for comfort outside. Even for her. The air bit at her, and she wondered if her breath would make icicles if she stood still enough. But she didn't stand still. Eric was waiting for her call, and she wasn't about to disappoint him. The fact that it was still light was a bit problematic. In the daytime, it would be much easier for someone to spot her in the shanty. Well, she simply couldn't worry about that now. She'd memorized Isabel's street address off the steel mailbox perched at the end of the drive, so she was ready to talk to Eric. Eric would have no trouble finding her and could wait for her on the street. Still, she wondered how she could make it down the drive without being seen. Especially if she was lugging her suitcase. Simply another thing she couldn't worry about right then. As she rounded the bend, she stopped cold. Someone was in the shanty. Now what was she to do? She glanced around quickly and saw a small stand of pine trees bordering an open field. She was surprised to see the pines there, as usually they were only in the woods. She smiled. There were pine trees at Powder's Point where she used to rendezvous with Eric. She shook herself. No time for reminiscing now. If the man in the shanty turned even slightly to his right, he'd see her. She scurried off the road and into the trees. She backed up against one of the pines and tried to avoid getting poked by the short stubby branches near the base of the tree. Easing herself forward a bit, she had a clear view of the shanty and the man. He gestured with his right hand and then hung up the phone. He didn't leave the shanty immediately. Instead, he leaned against the side window as if catching his breath. Sarah wondered what his call was about. She knew that calls were only sanctioned if they were business or emergency related. Which one was it for this man? The fact that he didn't scurry off made Sarah think it was a business call. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. It was colder standing still. Would he never leave? She cupped her hands around her mouth and blew into them, trying to warm her fingers. Why hadn't she snatched her mittens for the walk? The man was leaving. She watched him amble down the street as if he had all the time in the world. Well, she didn't. The minute he was out of sight, she scrambled from her hiding place and ran to the shanty. Once inside, she took a deep breath and pressed Eric's number into the phone. He answered before the first ring was complete. Is it you? It's me. I thought so. Hang on, just like the day before, she heard shuffling and a door slam. I have the address, she said. You ready? Yeah. What is it? She gave him the address. I can come tomorrow to get you. About how long does it take? 3 or 4 hours. I'm not sure. I wasn't exactly paying attention when the van brought us here. No worries. I'll stick the address in my phone GPS. What time can you be ready? Sarah's mind swirled. She was really going to go through with this. But what choice did she have? Otherwise, her baby would be stolen from her. I think 10 in the morning would be good. I'll make sure Annie is busy helping Isabel with the chores. I'll be packed. Sarah. Jaw. I can't wait to see you. Her heart warmed, and she closed her eyes. He loved her. Eric loved her, so everything would be all right. She didn't have to worry. He would take care of her. Me, too, she whispered back. Tomorrow, then? Tomorrow. Sarah hung up, and like the farmer before her, she didn't leave the shanty right away. She stood very still, staring through the window to the vast acres of farmland stretched out before her. Stubby cornstalks from the last harvest made short spiky rows across the land. Soon, they'd be lumps beneath the snow, but not yet. Sarah placed both hands over her stomach and gazed down. He's coming for us, little one. Everything's going to be fine. Her voice sounded strangely hollow inside the shanty. As if she didn't believe what she was saying. Chapter 4. You're back, Annie greeted her. Oh, you look cold. Would you like some tea? Sarah worked to keep her teeth from chattering. That'd be right nice. Annie took her cape from her shoulders. You're freezing, Sarah. You shouldn't have gone out. She pulled the kitchen rocker closer to the warming stove. Sit down, here. We'll get you warmed up in a minute. Sarah let Annie fuss over her and gladly sank into the rocker by the stove. The dry heat from the fire enveloped her, and she immediately began to feel better. The water's hot, so I'll have the tea for you real quick. Annie bustled about the kitchen, grabbing a mug and stretching to reach the tea from a shelf to the side of the sink. Sarah watched her as the heat from the stove sank deep within. Annie was a good sister. She always had been, if the truth were told. Sarah would miss her. Tears filled her eyes at the thought of not seeing her older sister anymore. And surely, she wouldn't. Dat would see to that. Sarah would be dead to them, for sure and for certain. Annie brought over the steaming mug and held it out to Sarah. Sarah reached for it, but instead took hold of Annie's wrist. Annie gave her a puzzled look. You all right, are Sarah? Sarah nodded, suddenly embarrassed. What was she thinking, grabbing onto Annie like that? She let go of Annie's wrist and took the mug. Of course, I'm all right. I just wanted to say thank you, Sarah's voice caught, and she couldn't continue for the tears clogging her throat. Annie bent close and looked into Sarah's eyes. You're welcome. You're always welcome. Sarah blinked and coughed. Her emotions were out of control. If she wasn't more careful, Annie would know something was up. She put her hands around the mug and took a sip of tea. The liquid burned through her, and Sarah was glad. She needed to get control of herself. But the yearning remained, nearly smothering her with its intensity. Sarah was missing her sister already, and she hadn't even left. Annie was right there, not 2 feet away. Stay focused, Sarah scolded herself. Stay focused. You have to do this. You have to do this for the baby. Your baby. Annie sank down onto a kitchen chair and folded her hands in her lap. Sarah felt her watchful eye even though she kept her own eyes downcast. If she looked up at Annie, she might be tempted to blurt out her escape plan, and that wouldn't do. No, that wouldn't do at all. Sarah decided not to pack the rest of her things that day. It could wait till morning. If Annie stopped by her room and found it bare, she'd wonder for sure. With grim determination, Sarah made it through the rest of the day, acting as normally as possible. More than once, she felt Annie watching her as she helped with food preparations, but Sarah resisted the urge to stare back. She even managed to join Annie's and Isabel's chatter about topics that held absolutely no interest to her. Who cared what the Farmer's Almanac said about the coming winter? And who cared about what happened to Farmer Gottschalk's goats? By bedtime, Sarah was exhausted from the pretense of it all. The only thing she could think about was sleep and Eric. Even the baby didn't consume any of her thoughts, except when she noticed a tightness around her stomach. At first, she wondered whether she was getting ill. But then, she realized that it had to be the baby growing. She smiled with wonder at the thought, and then promptly began thinking about Eric and his charming smile and warm eyes. She pulled the quilt up tight below her chin and drifted off to sleep, thrilled with the thought of seeing him the next morning. "Please come," Annie urged Sarah. "It will be a nice outing." "It's just to the local grocery," Sarah said. "I don't want to go." Fact was, if Annie and Isabel and the girls took the wagon into town, she would have the perfect chance to leave with Eric unseen. "We'll bundle up well," Annie said. "The girls want you to go." Sarah glanced at the large clock hanging above the sink. There was no way she'd be back by 10 if she went with them. "I'm a bit tired. I think I'd rather rest." Annie immediately looked concerned. "I'll stay home with you then." Sarah's eyes widened in alarm. "No. Annie, I'd feel bad if you stayed back on account of me. I won't even be by myself. Cousin Andrew is right outside." Annie bit the side of her lip. "True. Go on, then. Have yourself a good time. Quit fretting about me for once." Annie grinned at her. "All right. I will." Annie rushed off to bundle up, and Sarah breathed a sigh of relief. This was going to be perfect. She couldn't have asked for a better situation. She waved all of them off at 9:30. As soon as the pony led the wagon out of sight, she flew up the stairs. She yanked her suitcase from under the bed and flipped it open. Within minutes, she had all of her things tucked inside. She took the suitcase downstairs and set it next to the front door. Eric should show up in a little over 20 minutes, but she hardly thought it appropriate to stand out on the road to wait. She giggled at the sight she would make. Amish girl stands on road, suitcase at her feet, waiting for English boyfriend to pick her up. She pulled back the curtains of the large front room window and gazed across the lawn. If she positioned herself just right, she would be able to spot Eric's car from where she stood. She leaned against the window frame. Everything truly was going perfectly. She heard the side door slam and jerked her gaze toward the kitchen. Cousin Andrew? What was he doing inside? She looked at her suitcase, sitting right in front of the door, and panicked. She kicked it hard and it spun across the floor. Another kick sent it behind the couch. "Hey Sarah. You didn't go?" Andrew asked, entering the room. No, I didn't." Sarah could feel the heat on her face and knew that her cheeks would be red. Andrew didn't seem to notice. "Came in for something to eat." He looked at her with a sheepish grin. "Didn't rightly know anyone was home." Sarah put on a smile. "I see. So, you're sneaking food then?" Andrew laughed. "You caught me. Don't think I tucked far enough into those eggs this morning." "Don't worry. I won't tell," Sarah joked. "If you won't tell on me," she thought. "Are you needing something to do?" "No. I have some chores I'll be getting to." Andrew nodded and headed for the cupboard. Sarah scuttled for the dusting rag in case he came back to check on her. But in minutes, the side door slammed again, and he was gone. She dropped the rag onto the back of the couch and exhaled loudly. She glanced at the clock. 10 minutes now. And who knew if he'd be precisely on time? Eric hadn't seen her often in her Amish garb, but she didn't dare change into her English clothes. She thought of them tucked beneath her Amish clothes in the suitcase. It was bad enough that she was lugging a suitcase with her, but standing at the end of Isabel's drive in English clothes would alert any Amish passerby. She wasn't pleased about not changing, for she saw no reason to continue reminding Eric of how different they were. And nothing screamed different louder than her cape dress, her cap, and her clunky black shoes. But there was nothing to be done about it. Her hands shook as she fastened her cape around her neck. She pulled on her mittens and picked up her suitcase. She crept out the front door, glancing toward the barn. She paused on the top step, listening. She couldn't hear anything. Maybe Andrew wasn't in the barn at all. She stepped cautiously down the steps, her gaze still fixed toward the barn and the chicken coop. Still nothing. So far, so good. When her feet hit the gravel drive, she ran, racing down the path to the road. Once on the road, she paused to gasp for breath. Then she slipped to stand by the side of the largest tree she could find, positioning herself so that if Andrew emerged from either the barn or the house, he wouldn't be able to see her. She lay her suitcase flat on the ground. If a buggy came by, perhaps it wouldn't be noticed. She would simply smile and nod, and no one would be the wiser. It was colder than she'd thought, and her cheeks stung with it. The air was dry on her eyes and she kept blinking, searching down the road for any sign of Eric's black car. Minutes went by and still no sign of him. She began to despair. Had he changed his mind? Was he not coming for her after all? She shifted her weight back and forth, straining for a glimpse of him. Her heart was pounding now, and even in the cold, she was covered with a thin layer of sweat. Hurry up, Eric. Hurry. Hurry. In the distance, she saw the square black shape of a buggy coming her way. The horses were ambling, though, not trotting, so it would take a while before they reached her. She glanced around. Perhaps she should duck behind the tree when they drew near. But if she did, and if Andrew happened to look toward the road, he'd spot her. Her chest tightened. Eric, where are you? Just when her nerves were ready to burst, she heard the hum of a motor car coming near. She brightened, standing on tiptoe to look, although it didn't give her a better view. Around the bend came a black car, and Sarah's relief was so strong, she nearly went down to her knees. Instead, she grabbed up her suitcase and stepped onto the road. The car pulled up next to her, and she opened the back door to throw in her suitcase, and then climbed into the passenger seat. Go, she cried. Just go. Eric pressed on the gas, and they sped away. He swerved close to the shoulder of the road when they raced past the buggy. Sarah averted her face, so whoever was in the buggy wouldn't see her. Not that they'd know who she was anyway, but still, she knew how tongues would wag. After the initial burst, Eric slowed the car to a more reasonable speed, and Sarah finally turned to him. She took in his boyish good looks, and the way his black hair curled at the base of his neck, and his fine nose and structured chin. She let herself relax in his handsome presence. He glanced over at her, his gray eyes excited. So cool. That was like a getaway scene in a movie. You okay? She took a deep breath. I am now. He smiled and took her hand, giving it a squeeze. No one saw you leave? No. I mean, no. Annie went to the market. He nodded. Grabbed the papers from the floor. Sarah saw a small stack of papers on the floor by her feet. She snatched them up. What are they? Just look. She did, and her eyes went huge. Marriage license application? Did you know you can get it off the internet? So this is all we need? Her stomach turned somersaults as she looked at the document. Unfortunately, no. We still have to go to the clerk's office. I'm glad you're in Amish clothes. She frowned. Why? Because I'm thinking they might be more sympathetic about you not having an ID. What do you mean? To prove you're 18. But I'm not 18. Eric smiled. They won't know that. He squinted at her before turning his attention back to the road. You look 18. This isn't going to work. But it is. You'll see. Sarah pressed her hands over her stomach. It had to work. She prayed Eric was right. Then she stopped herself. How could she expect God to listen to such a prayer? How could she expect God to bless their union at all? Her lips trembled, and she clenched her teeth. All her worrying about God and what he thought was in the past now. She couldn't fret about such things. She loved Eric, and he loved her. They belonged together. It was as simple as that. You're feeling okay? Not sick or anything? Eric asked. I'm okay, she answered, even though right then, nausea was climbing up her throat. She wasn't sure if it was because of the pregnancy or sheer nerves. You can lay back and rest, if you want. It's gonna take a while to get back to Indiana. Can't we just get married here? Nope. It's gonna be tricky enough to pull it off at home. But you just said it would work. Sarah's alarm mounted. Eric patted her hand. Relax, would you? It'll be fine. But we gotta do it in Indiana. She leaned back into the seat and willed herself to calm down. She glanced at the clock on the dashboard and wondered when Annie would be back and realized she was gone. She and Eric had to be married before her parents found out she'd run away. But then, what would they do anyway? Go to the police? She seriously doubted it. No one in her community involved the police in anything if they could help it. A pang of sadness pricked her heart. In her mind's eye, she saw the look of disappointment that would be on her parents' faces when they found out what she'd done. But would it be disappointment or anger? Or grief? Or all three? She closed her eyes and concentrated on breathing. It would be all right. Of course, it would. She was with Eric now, and no one could break them apart. Chapter 5. Sarah must have fallen asleep, for the next thing she knew, the car had stopped and Eric was staring at her. We're here, he said. She wiggled upright in the seat and looked out the window. We're where? Where we're going to get our license. He took her hand. I chose the most obscure county clerk's office I could find. Now, I'm going to do most of the talking, all right? She smoothed her hair, tucking a few stray strands back under her cap. She said, completely agreeable to remaining as quiet as possible. He got out of the car and ran around to her side, helping her out. She stood blinking in the afternoon light. She was hungry, but she didn't think she should mention it. Her brain had switched into a kind of fog, and she was happy to go with it. Nothing seemed real. It was as if she was watching one of those English television shows. Like she was perched somewhere in the sky, observing a skinny, scared Amish girl clutching the hand of a handsome English boy. Like she wasn't there, standing at the counter, nodding her lies. Like she wasn't responsible for the massive step she was taking, rejecting everything in her Amish world, everything she'd been taught. Like she wasn't there an hour later, standing before a judge, pledging her life to this boy whom she'd only known for months. Like she'd had no part in any of it. When it was over, Eric took her hand and led her back to the car. They sat in the front seat, but Eric made no move to start the engine. Well, it's done, he said. Her eyes were huge, and she couldn't seem to make her voice work. I've done right by you. Eric touched her cheek with his fingers. I've done right by you? She blinked. His words seemed to be giving her a message, but with her stomach roaring with hunger and her brain in a fog, she couldn't think straight enough to receive it. She only knew his words were important somehow. Something was off, slightly skewed, but she couldn't see it. She was beyond starving now, a hollow emptiness raging through her stomach. She felt heady and knew that if she was standing, she'd topple over in a heap. Eric grabbed her shoulder. "You've gone white," he said. "Are you gonna puke? Open the window. Don't puke in the car." She shook her head. "I'm hungry," she finally managed to get out. Eric blew out his breath. "Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking. Wanna go have a celebration dinner or something?" He took out his wallet and glanced inside. "I've got some cash. I don't want to use my credit card anymore today. I think I'm about maxed out." He fingered the few dollar bills he had. "We have to go cheap. How about burger bites?" Tiny black spots clouded Sarah's vision. Burger bites? She didn't care. All she knew was that if she didn't eat soon, she was done for. Eric laughed when she didn't answer. "Burger bites, it is, then. Don't worry, Sarah. I'll get you fed." And he did. She stayed in the car while he ran inside to order. The drive-through line wound around the restaurant, and Eric said he'd get the food faster by going inside. Sarah waited with her head back against the headrest and her eyes closed. Her hands shook as she ate her hamburger. But by the time she got to the fries, she was feeling much better. "Okay, now?" Eric asked her. She nodded. "Sorry. I'm feeling all right now. You're gonna want to change your clothes. People are already staring." She glanced through the windshield and saw that indeed a few people were gawking inside their car. "I'm used to it." "Well, I'm not. They've got a bathroom inside," he said. She gave him her wrappers and got on her knees to stretch into the back seat. She dug through her suitcase and extracted a pair of jeans and a long-sleeved t-shirt. She hugged them to her chest and gazed at the restaurant. "Okay. I just go in and use the bathroom. Won't they ask me anything?" "Nah. They don't care. Just go on in. I'll wait for you here." She climbed out of the car and walked quickly inside. She scanned the place for the bathroom, finally spotting it tucked into the corner close to the pickup counter. She went inside and found an empty booth. It didn't take her long to change. She emerged from the booth and stared at herself in the massive mirror. It wasn't often that she saw so much of herself at once. She was surprised to see that she'd forgotten to take her cap off. It made her look like she was wearing some kind of bizarre costume. Jeans and a cap. With a rueful grimace, she pulled out the bobby pins and took it off, tucking it inside her pocket. She set her Amish clothes on the edge of the sink and pulled the pins from her hair, letting the thick bronze curls fall over her shoulders. She was proud of her hair, even though she knew God wouldn't be pleased at her vanity. But she'd always liked the way it felt as she ran her fingers through it. And she liked the gentle curls as it fell over her shoulders. She wondered what it would feel like now, to have it loose all the time. She shook her head and tossed a few strands over her shoulder. She'd observed her English friends toss their hair over their shoulders plenty of times. She paused, gazed into her own eyes, and then tossed her hair again. Her face went red. What was she thinking? Standing in front of a mirror ogling herself. She stepped back but couldn't take her eyes from the mirror. Who was she anymore? She hardly recognized herself. Well, no matter. Wasn't this what she wanted? She blinked and felt her eyes grow moist. Why in the world did she feel like crying when she was married now and everything was working out as she'd hoped? Why in the world did she feel a sadness sitting in her stomach like a forgotten cornerstone? The bathroom door blasted open and two teenage girls burst through laughing uproariously. They gave Sarah a quick glance and then ignored her, pushing and shoving each other as their laughter increased. Sarah snatched up her clothes and fled back to the car. Eric turned in his seat to admire her. You look better. Sarah nodded, but doubt wormed through her. Did she look better? Different, for sure and for certain. But, better? Eric reached over and ran his fingers through her hair. It's beautiful down like that. She looked at him, her new husband. She looked at him and felt a rush of love. He leaned over and kissed her gently. Her stomach did a flip as his kiss turned more probing. He pulled her to his side of the car and kept kissing her. His arms were strong around her, pulling her closer still. Her mind balked. Kissing like that in public? Why, anyone in the world could see them. She stiffened, and he let go. What's wrong? We're married now, you know. Her breathing was uneven, and she swallowed hard to clear the lump from her throat. Eric looked puzzled, and she thought she detected a bit of impatience in his expression. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not used to, well, not used to. PDA, right? Her brows arched in confusion. Public displays of affection. She nodded. Why was she feeling so uncomfortable all of a sudden? She had expected to feel nothing but giddy happiness on her marriage day. But the feelings tumbling through her right then were a far cry from happiness. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing the tears not to come. What's wrong, Sarah? She shook her head. Nothing. Do you think we can go home? With those words, another horrifying thought struck her. Just where was home now? In her haste to leave Ohio, she hadn't even asked him where they'd live. Eric blew out his breath and pressed his lips together. Do your parents know yet? No. When she started to protest, he held up his hand. Don't worry. I have plans to tell them. But where will we stay? Panic mounted through Sarah, and her voice rose in pitch. Where are we going to go? Eric grabbed her shoulder. Sarah, will you calm down? I have it under control. But where? We're staying in my buddy's lake cabin. Just for a while. Lake cabin? It's not far from Hollybrook. About a half hour. It's not exactly his, but it's his parents'. So we'll be fine there. He gave her a hopeful look, but she saw the nervousness on his face. For how long? She asked. Just till I work everything out with my parents. She took a shuddering breath and slumped back into the seat. All right. It's going to be fine. I promise. She nodded. Eric was her husband now, and she had a duty to be obedient. All right, Eric. Let's go. Eric's smile was wide as he turned back to the ignition and started the car. Sarah closed her eyes and decided to sleep on the way there. That way, she'd be in better condition to settle into their new home and begin her tasks as a wife. She rubbed her hand over her stomach. And not very far in the future, to begin her tasks as a mother. Chapter 6. Sarah awoke to the crunch of gravel. She roused herself and gazed out the car window. They were in a little community of log cabins, many of them looking identical. The one Eric pulled up to had 2 large windows in the front and an ample porch with 2 rockers sitting on it. Oh, it looks nice, Sarah said. This is it. Home sweet home. Eric jumped out of the car and came around to her side, helping her out. Her legs felt cramped, and her back was stiff, but there was an excitement in her heart that propelled her forward. It's lovely, she said. She hurried to the porch steps and climbed them quickly. She sat down on one of the rockers. This is just like home. I love rockers on the front porch. Eric joined her, carrying her suitcase and one of his own. I've got the key. Let's go in. He unlocked the door, and they entered a dark, cold room. Sarah shivered and put her arms around herself. Oh, it's freezing in here. No worries. I'll get the heat on. Eric flipped on the lights and looked around. Then he walked to a small box on the wall and fiddled with it. Should heat up in no time, now. Sarah nodded toward the fireplace. Can we have a fire? Don't see why not. Let's look around first. Haven't you been here before? Once or twice. When I was about 7. He laughed. Come on. He took her hand and pulled her through the room which served as both the front room and kitchen. The furniture looked old and a bit dusty but comfortable enough. The kitchen area had everything. A fridge, a stove, counters, and a sink. Sarah smiled to herself. Soon, she'd be cooking for Eric right there on that very spot. The walls were logs and there were a few photos hung about, but not much else. Sarah shuddered when she spotted a gun mounted above the mantel. The floors were polished wood, and she noted there were occasional rag rugs strewn about. She wondered whether they had been bought from the Amish. Eric was still pulling on her arm, leading her to the back of the cabin where there were 2 bedrooms and a bathroom, complete with a shower. This is where I slept, Eric said, stepping inside the far bedroom. He pointed to the bottom bunk of one of 2 bunk beds. Right there on that bed. He led her to the next bedroom where there was a large bed in the center of the room. But here is where we'll sleep. She looked at the fluffy pillows and the piled blankets and wanted to crawl right in and sleep for a week. But Eric drew her into a hug and kissed her neck and cheeks and lips. Despite herself, she backed away slightly, and then realizing what she was doing, she kissed him with more fervor. She couldn't have Eric think she didn't love him anymore, now, could she? Especially right after their wedding. Wedding? Was that short bit of time in the judge's impersonal quarters a wedding? Eric responded to her renewed fervor and hugged her so tightly, her feet left the floor. He began to laugh, and she joined him. We're actually married. Can you believe it? He asked. No. I can't. She touched the soft curl behind his ear. Then she ran her hand over the back of his neck. He moaned and clasped her more tightly. We should unpack, she said. What? Now, he asked, his voice husky. But upon seeing her expression, he acquiesced. Fine. I'll go get the bags. Sarah walked to the bed and sat down. It was just as comfortable as it looked. She pulled down the covers and kicked off her shoes. Within seconds, she was nestled inside, her eyelids heavy. Eric returned with a bag in each hand. Whoa! You're already in bed. She closed her eyes and nodded. She heard him drop the bags, and the next thing she knew he was climbing into bed on the far side. He wiggled over until he was holding her. Sarah, he asked. Sarah. His voice was a bit louder. Don't fall asleep yet. But she couldn't help it. She was asleep within seconds. When Sarah awoke, it was dark and there was a distinct chill in the air. She stared into the shadows, trying to place where she was, and then it came back to her in a rush. She was in someone's lake cabin with Eric. Her husband. She smiled and stretched, wondering what time it was. On the bedside stand there was a digital clock. It flashed 2:35 in red. It was the middle of the night. She pulled back the covers and got up. She needed to go to the bathroom badly. If she remembered correctly, the bathroom was right next door, although she couldn't be sure, for the night before had been somewhat of a blur. She fumbled through the hall and found the bathroom easily. She didn't turn on any lights, as she was used to the dark at night. Only rarely did she light a candle or a lantern during the wee hours. Sometimes, she used a flashlight if the batteries were still good. Nevertheless, she didn't need any light to find her way back to the bedroom. She climbed into bed and stretched her arm tentatively across the sheets, feeling for Eric, but his side of the bed was empty. She sat up and patted his side more thoroughly, thinking she must have missed him. But no, he wasn't there. She got back up and felt her way into the front room. Dim light stole through the windows, making shadowy patterns on the floor. She paused, letting her eyes adjust. A faint rhythmic breathing sounded from the couch to her right. She tiptoed closer and leaned down. Eric was sprawled there, fast asleep. Why was he sleeping in the front room? She pulled an Afghan from the back of the couch and laid it over him gently, careful not to wake him. She didn't return immediately to bed. Instead, she stood on the cold floor, watching the shape of her husband as he slept. An overwhelming tenderness filled her, and she couldn't resist touching him. She got down on her knees next to the couch and laid her head on his shoulder. He stirred slightly but didn't awaken. "I love you," she whispered. But the air was too cold, and she needed to get under the covers. With a last lingering look at Eric, she stood and went back to bed. The next morning, Eric nudged her. "Sarah? Sarah, you awake?" She opened her bleary eyes and smiled up at him. "I'm awake. Let's eat. I'm starving." She wriggled to a sitting position. "I'll make breakfast." She quickly threw back the covers and got up. We have a little problem," Eric said. "What's that?" "There's no food in the house." Sarah frowned. "Nothing? No eggs? Bacon? Flour?" "Nothing. I searched and found a couple cans of veggie soup. That's it." Sarah padded out to the kitchen. "Then, we'll have veggie soup," she said. It didn't take long to warm up the cans of soup. Sarah was disappointed that the first breakfast she served her new husband was so inappropriate. She dreamed of making a true Amish breakfast for him, hearty food that would stick to his ribs. "And make him glad he married me," she thought with a blush. "Can we go in for groceries today?" Sarah asked, picking up their empty bowls. Her family always shopped at the Feed and Supply, but she could hardly show her face there. In truth, she was going to have to be careful about showing her face anywhere. If the fact that she was back in the Hollybrook area got to her parents, she wasn't sure what might happen. She washed the bowls and set them in the rack to drain. Now that she pondered it, she truly didn't know what would happen. Would her parents come for her? Or would they simply banish her from their lives? The whole idea was unsettling. She took the dish rag and ran it swiftly over the table, cleaning up the few drips left behind. "I don't have a whole lot of money. I used most of it at Burger Bites," Eric said. "Do you have any?" "A little. Won't buy many groceries, though." Eric moved to an armchair and sat down. "I'm going to have to go to my parents. Will they be mad?" "At first." "Am I going with you?" "No," he said. She flinched at the speed of his answer. "But why? Won't they want to meet me?" "Look, Sarah, I'm not sure how things work with you Amish, but I've got to ease them into this. They'll come around, don't worry. But I need to do it slowly." "I'm not sure what slowly even means." Eric sighed. "Just trust me, okay?" She frowned, and he stood and came to her. He put his arms around her and held her close. "I'm sorry. It's going to be fine. You just have to give me some time to work it all out." "But I thought you had a plan." She felt him stiffen and instantly regretted her words. He let go of her and walked to the window, looking out. It frosted last night. He turned back to the fireplace. "I can get a fire going for you." "That'd be nice." I'm going to go into town and see what food I can rustle up. Will you be okay without me? She hesitated for only a second. Yes. Of course. But in truth, the last thing she wanted was to be left alone in the woods. As far as she could tell driving up the day before, none of the other cabins were occupied. She imagined they were mostly used during the summer months. Eric went into the bathroom and brushed his teeth. She heard him spit into the sink before he returned, carrying his coat. I won't be long, okay? Okay. He gave her a quick kiss and was gone. She stared at the closed door and then turned back to the fireplace. He hadn't built her a fire after all, but it wasn't really cold in the cabin. The heating system seemed to be in good order. Yet there was nothing cozier than sitting before a fire. She walked to the stack of wood at the side of the hearth. She didn't need anyone to build her a fire. She'd done it enough times in her life. There was a stack of old newspaper next to the wood. She knelt on the rag rug before the hearth and got busy. A box of long matches sat next to the fireplace screen. She laughed when she took one out. She'd never seen such a thing. Why would anyone need a long match like that? It seemed perfectly silly. Once the fire was going well, Sarah went back to the kitchen area. She opened all the cupboards, searching for canned goods. Surely, there was something to eat. She'd never heard of a kitchen without a pantry bursting with jars of fruit, vegetables, jellies, and jams. But after probing deeply inside every cupboard, she came up empty-handed. With a sigh, she pulled the armchair directly in front of the fire and sat down. The flames licked up the sides of the logs, snapping and spitting sparks up the chimney. Other than that, it was quiet. So quiet she could hear herself breathe. She patted her stomach. "How are you doing down there?" she asked, her voice like a soft melody. "I love you, little one. We did it. Your mom and dad are married now." She smiled, realizing she needed to drop her Pennsylvania Dutch. "Your mom and dad are married now," she repeated in English. Would she teach her little one Pennsylvania Dutch? It had been her first language, after all. But then, why would the child need it in the English world? He, or she, wouldn't. She wondered what Annie was doing. Of course, they all would know she was gone by now. They probably searched around the farm for her first. Then they would have spread the search to the community. When that didn't turn her up, she imagined Annie would have used the phone shanty to call Hollybrook. She would have called the Ebersols who had a phone in their barn. Then the Ebersols would then have gone to Mam and Dat to tell them. She closed her eyes and visualized her mam getting the news. Would she be worried? Why, of course, she would be. Or... Sarah gulped. Perhaps her parents would see this as an answer to their prayers. If their daughter ran away and couldn't be found, they wouldn't have to deal with the shame of it all. Sarah would just be gone. Out of their lives. Sarah opened her eyes and sat up straight. But wouldn't they try to find her? Wouldn't they go to Eric's parents? But they had no idea what Eric's last name was. How could they find his parents? Besides, confrontation wasn't their way. There would be no showdown. But there would be gossip. She had no doubt about that. The Ebersols weren't known for keeping things quiet. No. The tongues would be wagging. Everyone would find out. Joseph Yoder will find out. Sarah tensed. She knew he was sweet on her. What would he think when he heard the news? A flash of shame threatened to overcome her, but she shook her head. She couldn't and wouldn't worry herself about Joseph Yoder. He wasn't anything to her. But she was to him. She felt a moment of sorrow for him. She shuddered and glanced around the cabin. This was her home now. at least for the time being. And she would do her best to make it nice and cozy and welcoming for Eric. She needed to put aside her Amish life. She needed to put aside her past. With that thought, she got up and found a broom. She spent the next hour sweeping and dusting. She even cleaned the toilet and shower. When she was finished, she was pleasantly tired. A good kind of tired. She put all the cleaning supplies away and stepped into the bathroom to take her own shower. She'd wash her hair, too. Eric loved her hair. Eric returned just before noon. She watched him get out of the car and noticed the solemn look on his face. Her stomach tightened as she saw him grab a bag of groceries and approach the cabin. She rushed to the door and threw it open for him. "You're back," she cried, throwing her arms around him. He laughed, and they tumbled inside. "Nice welcome." "I like it," he said, setting the bag on the table. "You got some food?" "Not a lot. But it should be enough for a day or two." She dug in the bag and pulled out 2 small frozen pizzas, each in a thin cardboard box, a medium-sized box of dry cereal, a half-gallon of milk, a loaf of white bread, and a jar of peanut butter. No eggs, no bacon, no lettuce or fruit. She turned to him and put a big smile on her face. "Thank you, Eric. Should hold us for a while anyway." He gazed at the fire. "Oh, man. I forgot to build you a fire." "It's all right. It wasn't any trouble." He sloughed out of his coat and threw it over the back of the couch. "I stopped over at Dean's." She knew Dean from her time at Powder's Point. He always came with Eric. "How is he?" "This is his parents' cabin." "Oh." "I wondered. Turns out he hasn't told them we're using it." "What?" Sarah was alarmed. Was everything they were doing secret? Shouldn't be a problem, though. His mom doesn't like to come here in the winter. Eric rubbed his hand over his chin. Sarah watched him and realized that he wouldn't be growing a beard. All Amish men immediately grew a beard when they were married. But Eric wasn't Amish, and frankly, neither was she. What made a person Amish anyway? She was quite certain that being with child and running away to marry an Englisher wouldn't qualify her anymore. She placed the cereal box on the shelf next to the peanut butter. And what about God? Did she still believe in him like before? She shivered and deliberately changed her train of thought. "Did you stop by to see your folks?" Eric bent over and threw another log onto the fire. "No," at her soft intake of breath, he continued. "I will, though. I told you." He squatted before the fire, and the light from the flames played over his face. She realized that she hadn't turned on any house lights, though the day was cloudy. She'd have to get used to having lights at the flick of a switch. It really was quite wonderful. She moved to the wall and turned the kitchen lights on. Eric glanced up at her. "Were you okay while I was gone?" "Jaw. I mean, yes. I cleaned everything." He glanced around and nodded. "Nice. Are you hungry?" "I am. Do you want a peanut butter sandwich?" "Yeah." She got right to it, wishing there were homemade apricot preserves handy. But plain peanut butter would have to do. She made 2 sandwiches for Eric and 1 for herself. With dismay, she noted that almost half the loaf of bread was gone now. She'd have to be more careful, which could prove difficult. She was beginning to regain her appetite, and it was coming back with a vengeance. She glanced over the paltry amount of food they had for the next couple days and knew it would never be enough. Well, it had to be. As simple as that. If it were only springtime, she could plant a little garden. She cringed. What was she thinking? If it was springtime, they wouldn't be able to hide away in this cabin anymore. Dean's family would be using it. She put Eric's sandwiches on a plate and took the plate to him. He grabbed her hand and tugged, bringing her down to his level. He kissed her long and hard. "I think we forgot we're married," he said, his voice low. He set the plate on the couch and pulled her into his lap. He tightened his arms around her and kissed her again, a lingering kiss that reminded Sarah why she'd fallen for him in the first place. When he drew away, he raised his brow. "Are you sleepy? Want to take a nap?" She giggled at his thinly veiled request. "Eat your sandwich first," she said in a teasing voice. "You're a hard woman," he answered back, tweaking her hair over her shoulder. Chapter 7. Later that afternoon, Sarah sat on the couch wondering what she was supposed to do. Everything was clean. There was nothing to read. No animals to tend. Nothing to cook. She wasn't used to having free time, and she had no idea what to do with herself. "Quit your squirming," Eric said. "What's wrong with you anyway?" He put his cell phone down on the arm of the couch. "What are we supposed to do?" "I don't know. It's Sunday afternoon. What do you usually do?" "Since this isn't a preaching Sunday, I'd be out visiting family and friends. We could go visit Michaela if you want. I know you're pretty good friends with her." Sarah perked up. "Oh, I'd love that. Can we?" "Don't see why not." Eric stood. "Wait a minute. How about if I call her? She can visit us here." "Why?" Gas. "I'm trying to conserve." Sarah nodded. "All right. Can you call her?" "No, but you can." He picked up his cell and punched in a number, handing her the phone. Sarah put it to her ear. After 5 rings, it went to voicemail, but she didn't leave a message. She handed the phone back to Eric. No answer. "She's not home." Eric laughed. "Doesn't really work that way anymore. She could be at home, just not answering her phone." Sarah was disappointed. Seeing Michaela would have been something to do. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the pines scattered among a variety of trees with naked branches. Perhaps they were maple. Or oak. She wasn't sure. As she turned away from the window, she caught sight of a dark red car coming down the narrow road. "Hey, someone's coming," she said. Eric sprang up and joined her at the window. "Whoa! It's Jalen's car." "Nice." Jalen also used to join them at Powder's Point. Sarah liked him all right, even though his voice was like the bellow of a bull. "Hey, I think Dean's with him." Eric was already out the door, standing on the porch, waving them in. Sarah stepped outside, but it was so cold, she ducked back into the house, walking straight to the fireplace. "Come in, guys," Eric said, his voice animated. "So glad you came." Dean and Jalen came in, stomping their shoes on the welcome mat. "So, congratulations, bro," Jalen cried, his voice booming. "Yeah. Congrats to you, too, Sarah." Dean came over and gave her a quick hug. She flinched, not accustomed to receiving hugs from anyone other than family. "And Eric." "Of course, Eric." "Thanks," she murmured. "How'd you like the cabin?" Dean's face was beaming. "It's right nice." "Glad you think so. Nice solution, don't you think? Especially since Eric doesn't plan to tell his." Eric jerked forward and slapped Dean on the back. "Like I said, so glad you guys came." Dean laughed and plunked down on the couch. Sarah's brow furrowed. Was Dean about to say that Eric didn't plan to tell his folks? Was he was going to say? But Eric had assured her that he just needed a bit more time. She looked at him, but he avoided her eyes, instead reaching over to flip the TV on. "Don't bother with that," Dean said. "Mom and Dad cut the cable during the winter months." "Who needs TV anyway?" Jylin asked. "Let's play." Sarah watched as they all got out their phones and synced to some game. She didn't understand how it worked, nor did she really want to. Staring at a tiny screen to play games seemed silly to her. She had eyed a couple of box games on a shelf in the hallway. She'd rather play those. Truth be told, she was somewhat of an expert with Scrabble. "We could play one of the games in the hallway," she suggested, giving each of them a hopeful look. Not one of them heard her. Or if they had, they were too involved with their phones to pay her any mind. She wandered over to the fireplace and sat down on the armchair in front of it. The flames were dancing wildly, so she assumed the wind was kicking up outside. She rested her head back and closed her eyes, not falling asleep, though. That would have been impossible with the guys shouting at each other, sometimes cheering, sometimes accusing each other of cheating. They got louder and louder, to the point where it started to give Sarah a headache. She considered going into the bedroom and lying down. But she wasn't accustomed to taking naps during the day. She tapped her fingers on the armrest of the chair, and a deep restlessness surged through her. She gazed around the small cabin. She couldn't see one thing that needed tending to. Not one thing. And there were no ingredients to cook with. Her mind wandered again to Annie. She hoped her sister wasn't too worried about her. She already missed Annie, which surprised her. During the last week, Sarah had been highly irritated with her sister's hovering presence. But now, knowing that she wouldn't see her for months or perhaps ever again, she missed her. Missed her enough to feel actual pain in her chest. She'd been wrong to be so annoyed with Annie. Dad's plan wasn't Annie's fault at all. And she couldn't fault Annie for being excited about it. She knew how dearly her sister yearned for a baby. Sarah sighed heavily. She missed Annie. Plain and simple. She missed her younger sister Miriam, too. Unbidden tears filled her eyes. She swiped at them with impatience. Why was she acting so maudlin? She was married to the man she loved, and she was going to have a baby. The man she loved. Sarah glanced over at Eric and his friends again. Eric was laughing, his eyes intent on his phone. The three of them started to make revving noises, like a fast race cars. Then they all cracked up, guffawing like donkeys. Eric didn't seem like a man, he was too young. Her nostrils flared. How absurd. Of course, he was a man. He was about to be a father. Eric peered at her over his screen and gave her a warm smile, and just as quickly, his attention went back to the game. But his smile had done its work. Sarah felt his charm down to her toes. How wrong she was to doubt him. And how inappropriate. He would be a wonderful husband and father. Of course, he would. And he loved her. She saw it in his eyes. The afternoon wore on with the slowness of a lame hog in the heat of summer. Sarah had never felt so fidgety in her life. In desperation, she dug out an old magazine from beneath stacks of toilet paper in the bathroom cabinet. The magazine was years out of date, but it made no difference to her. She was reading it the second time through when Jylin tossed his phone to the couch. "I'm about to go dead here. You got a charger?" Dean nodded toward the kitchen, his eyes still glued to his phone. "In the top drawer." Jylin stood and stretched his long arms over his head, touching the ceiling. "And I'm hungry. What do you got to eat?" Sarah gave a start. Hardly anything, she thought, watching with dread as Jylin headed toward the fridge. He pulled open the door. Man, you guys got nothing. There's only some milk in here. Sarah held her breath. He pulled open the freezer door. Bingo, he cried, removing the 2 boxes of pizza. Anybody else hungry? Dean looked up. I could eat. Without asking permission, Jilin opened both boxes and each pizza fell out onto the counter with a hollow thud. He switched the oven on and then began removing the cellophane from around the crusts. Sarah's eyes flashed to Eric. He looked at her, and she knew he was thinking the same thing she was. If they ate the pizzas, she and Eric would run out of food before the next day was over. She waited for him to say something, anything. But he only got up and walked to the kitchen to take 4 plates and 4 glasses out of the cupboard. We're drinking water, he said. Hope that's okay. Fine by me, Dean answered. I might have a glass of milk, if that's all right. You got any chocolate syrup to put in it? Sarah watched with growing dismay as Jilin poured himself a huge glass of milk. She had been taught her whole life to be hospitable and to share freely, and she'd never given it a second thought. Generosity was just their way. But then, she'd never been in danger of starving to death before either. She chastised herself. She wasn't going to starve to death. But still, as she watched the boys, her eyes misted over and she had an overwhelming urge to leave and to just go home. To her real home. Where there was food. And chores to tend to. And her family. She wanted to sit next to the warming stove and have Ma'am serve her tea and homemade biscuits. She wanted to help clean up the kitchen and stack the dishes on the wide wooden shelves. She wanted to glance into the pantry and help Ma'am decide what to serve at the upcoming meal. She'd been gone from home for mere days, and she was already forlorn and homesick. It wouldn't do. She swallowed and jumped up from her chair. Here, let me help you, she said to Eric. I can fill these glasses. Eric gave her a look of such gratitude that she nearly dropped the glass she was holding under the faucet. He put his arm around her and squeezed her waist before joining his friends at the table. Sarah finished filling the glasses and set them before the boys. The oven dinged, and she slid the pizzas onto the rack inside. 10 minutes, she said. And then they'll be ready. Dean and Jilin stayed way too long. Sarah was ready to drop with exhaustion, which made no sense as she'd hardly done a thing all day. I have to leave early in the morning, Eric told her. Why? School. Did you forget I still go to school? Truly, she hadn't even thought about it. But of course, he still had to go to school. This was his senior year, and then he would graduate. She pursed her lips. If he left in the morning, she would be alone all day. With nothing to do. Eric cleared his throat. There's something else. His cheeks showed a faint tinge of pink and there was guilt written all over his face. Sarah's chest tightened. What is it? I might not be back tomorrow night, either. Her mouth dropped open, and he rushed on. But don't worry. I'll for sure be here the next day. She stared at him. Why? Well, since my folks don't know we're married yet, they'll wonder why I don't come home for the night. Tonight is okay because they think I'm at Dean's. Last night, too. Sarah took a jagged breath. She was so stunned, she couldn't speak. So, she was to stay there for almost 2 days by herself with nothing to do. And nothing to eat? Her thoughts flew to the baby. Didn't she need better nourishment when she was pregnant, not worse? Eric tried to put his arms around her, but she stiffened and pulled back. He moaned. Don't be that way, Sarah. It's only for a while. I'll tell them and then everything will be all right. Something burst inside Sarah, and she jerked off the couch and faced him. All right? You think this is all right? I have nothing to keep me busy here. And there's no food. How can this be all right? Her voice was loud and ugly, and she was immediately ashamed, but she couldn't stop herself. She glared at him, shaking from head to toe. The room fell into silence. All that could be heard were Sarah's quick, labored breaths. She struggled to get herself under control, and her breathing turned into puffing wheezes. Eric appeared blindsided. But what had he expected? She wondered if he knew her at all. I'm sorry, he finally said. I didn't know you'd get so mad. She gulped air, not sure at all whether she was mad. She'd reacted like she was. But more than anger, she shook with raw disappointment. It raked across her dreams, and she didn't know how to stop it. A stiff silence stretched between them. I'm sorry, too, she finally said. He stood, and she looked up at him. She saw a myriad of emotions play over his face, and she was horrified to see regret flash in his eyes. Regret? For what? For marrying her? He didn't move except the faintest tightening of his jaw. Her heart squeezed in pain. Regret? Was that what he was feeling? Her mouth tightened into a scowl. She felt it and tried to dislodge it, but it stuck like cement. She gasped, and her heart pounded against her ribs. It was too fast and too hard, and she panicked that she was going to die. She knew it then. She was going to fall onto the floor that very second and die. You don't want me, she rasped, her voice hard and bitter and dying. He didn't answer, but his eyes never left hers. Her breathing went shallow then, and she wondered where the air went. Who was sucking it from the room? Tiny black spots danced at the edge of her vision. She moved her eyes to try and follow them, but they escaped her. She felt herself waver, and her knees went weak. Sarah! Eric cried through a thick blanket of fog. Sarah! Chapter 8. The next thing Sarah knew was the sensation of cold on her forehead. Freezing cold. And drips going down the side of her head and puddling in her ears. What? She muttered, struggling to a sitting position. A wet rag fell off her head and flopped into her lap, splashing her with a spray of cold water. You're awake. He sighed, and his relief was tangible. She looked at him kneeling by her side. He was crying, tears slowly rolling down his cheeks. She reached over and touched his face. The tips of her fingers fluttered over his cheeks. She saw her hand shake, and she wondered why. You scared me, Eric said. With a gasp, he buried his face in her neck. She reached her slender arms around him and held him while he cried, huge shuddering sobs that shook him to his core. After he stopped crying, he stayed buried in her neck for a long time. She lay her head on top of his. She wondered what he was thinking. What he was feeling. What they were doing. She had seen his regret. Seen it as clearly as if it was blazoned across the sky in a huge sheet of pain. Even now, his regret filled the space, pressing in on her with surprising force. He pulled his head up, and his eyes were swollen and his nose was red. I'm sorry. His face went pink. I feel like an idiot. He scrambled up from the floor and sat beside her where she was still half lying on the couch. She scooted over to make room for him. That won't happen again. She didn't know how to respond. Only one time had she'd seen a man cry like that. Her dad, when her brother James was killed. Dad had sobbed for hours, sending terror through Sarah. She remembered the feeling as if it had just happened. And now, looking at Eric, she felt the same terror begin to build again, filling her from the outside in, crowding her, taking all the room inside. Sarah averted her eyes. A log in the fire broke in half, falling and sending a flurry of sparks up the chimney. The coals around it glowed red and orange, as if they were alive, blinking at her, taunting her. Sarah. What? She still couldn't look at him. I'm sorry. Why? I didn't have this as planned out as I thought. Eric put his fingers under her chin and turned her face to his. I'm sorry. He leaned close and touched her lips with his. She blinked back the tears. He had kissed her many times. So many times. But it had never been like this. This kiss mixed with tears, this kiss felt like a goodbye. Panicked, she reached out and encircled him with her arms. Pulling hard, she drew him to her and held on. He hesitated and slowly, as if in pain, he returned her embrace. She raised her lips to his and kissed him. He felt stiff to her one moment, then limp the next. She kissed him again, embarrassed by her own persistence, but driven to continue. What was happening? Usually, all she had to do was press herself to him, and he would eagerly respond. But she wouldn't give up. She could kiss his regret away. If he would just give her time, she knew she could. Eric? He didn't answer her, but his arms tightened their embrace. She blew out her breath in relief. It was going to be all right. And maybe she was just being emotional. Didn't all pregnant women get emotional? Sarah squeezed her eyes shut. Surely, this is all normal. How could she have supposed there wouldn't be major adjustments? And then he let go of her. He rubbed his hands over his thighs and kept his eyes on the floor. I guess we should talk about a doctor. Her brow furrowed. Why? I'm feeling all right now. You need to go. All pregnant girls need to go to the doctor. And frequently, from what I know. Besides, you just fainted. But I'm feeling fine. And when the time comes? That's another thing. He cut her off. Are you on your dad's insurance? Because I don't see how we could possibly afford it if you're not. My dad's insurance? He blew out his breath, his cheeks puffing with air. I don't think I can get you on my parents' insurance. I don't really know. So if we can keep you on your dad's, he gave her a hopeful look. We don't have insurance. None of us do. His eyes widened. What do you mean? We don't believe in insurance. It's for the English. She stopped herself, realizing that she was to be an Englisher herself. I mean, the Amish use midwives. I guess that's what I plan to do. I hadn't thought about it much. Don't you have midwives? Midwives, he repeated. His brow lowered. Yeah, I guess there are midwives. I don't think many people use them. But, Sarah, you'll have to go to the hospital to have the baby. She drew back. I don't see why. Hardly anyone ever goes to the hospital, and we do just fine. I don't want to go to the hospital. She was getting worked up, and she saw the dismay on Eric's face. She clamped her mouth shut. He stood up and began pacing the room. I don't understand. You plan to have the baby at home? Like, in a bed? He stopped and looked at her. Well, I mean, yes. He shook his head over and over. No. No. That's not right. But it is. We've done it that way forever. Something reared up inside her. How could he question her ways? He wasn't the one who was pregnant. He didn't know what was best. She covered her mouth. Why was she clinging to her Amish ways? What are we doing? He asked, kneeling before her. What were we thinking? His regret was back. Standing on its hind legs. Clawing at the air. Tears sprang to her eyes, and she stared at him with dread. You want out, don't you? Already. Is that what you want? We've been married a whole 10 minutes, and now you're done. I never said. You're saying it right now. Do you think I'm an imbecile? She jumped from the couch, went dizzy for an instant, but with sheer grit, steadied herself. I may not have gone to high school, but I know what I see. She flew from the room, running into the bedroom and slamming the door behind her. With a sob, she fell onto the bed, curling into a ball. She rocked herself back and forth on the mattress. Strangely, no tears came. Her eyes were dry. Her throat felt dry, too. Dry and scratchy and painful. Eric knocked on the door, but she ignored him. He knocked again, then turned the knob and came in. She closed her eyes. He sat next to her, the bed dipping under his weight. I'm sorry. I'm not done with us. I'm not. I won't desert you, Sarah. She squeezed her eyes more tightly shut. He wouldn't desert her? What he didn't say bellowed through her head. He didn't say he loved her. He didn't say he was excited about having a baby. He didn't say he wanted to build a home with her. What have I been thinking? I am delusional. I said I wasn't an imbecile, but I am. I am. I am. She hugged her stomach and cried for her baby. She'd wanted to give it a family. A family with its real mother and father. She'd wanted to be a wonderful ma'am, cooking and cleaning and sewing and harvesting and nurturing and loving and praying. She squeezed her eyes tight. And praying? She swallowed past the rock in her throat. I am describing an Amish mother. She tightened her grip on her stomach as the truth blasted through her. I want to give the baby an Amish mother. An Amish home. Eric put his hand on her shoulder, and she barely kept herself from recoiling. He didn't want her. Nor did he want any part of her former life. What had happened? She didn't know. She didn't know. Fear shook her. It twisted through her stomach and rose through her chest, an ugly consuming monster. What had they done? Instinctively, she began to pray. Then she remembered God would never want to listen to her. Not after the mess she'd made of everything. She put her hand over her mouth in horrifying awareness that she was now all alone. Sarah, are you going to puke? Eric asked. You want me to help you to the bathroom? She shook her head, her eyes still tightly shut. Her hand dropped away from her mouth. She wasn't alone. She wasn't. I want my sister, she said into the blackness of her closed eyes. I want Annie. And she did. She yearned for Annie. Somehow, her sister would make things right again. Your sister? The one who came to Powder's Point that night to meet me? The one who went to Ohio with you? Sarah nodded and opened her eyes. Eric stared at her as if he didn't recognize her. In a whisper, he continued, the one who is going to steal your baby? Your baby? Sarah's eyes went hard, and she shook her head over and over. The silence between them stretched across the frozen air. She inched away from him. Don't you mean our baby? He flinched, and his face turned red. You know what I mean, he argued. I know exactly what you mean. Her words scraped like a drill through metal. He flinched again, blinking rapidly. Sarah. Sarah got off the bed on the far side and walked around it, picking up her suitcase from the corner of the room as she came. I'm going to leave now. Sarah. We're married. We lied, Eric. I still don't understand how we got away with it. He stood, and she saw him falter and then grab the bedpost to regain his balance. So, we're finished. Just like that? You're walking out. She paused and something inside her turned hard. It's all a lie. But we love each other. She looked at him then, and her eyes filled with tears. I guess we do, she whispered. But it's not enough. Not for you. Not for me. Not for this baby. His eyes welled with tears. He blinked and they spilled out, running down his cheeks. We could still try. Jaw. We could. When are you going to tell your parents? He swallowed so hard, she could hear it. I can tell them tomorrow. Their eyes locked, and Sarah knew he was silently pleading with her. He wanted her to tell him not to bother. He wanted her to tell him not to inform his parents. You don't want to admit what we did, she whispered. I'll tell them tomorrow. I will. His chest rose. She shook her head. What are you going to do? He asked. Sarah opened the suitcase on the bed. Her movements were measured and mechanical. She marveled that she was able to function at all. An odd sensation filled her, as if she wasn't really in her body, but was above herself, floating about the room, moving her body parts by pulling marionette strings. Did she need to pack her shirts? Pull up on the arm string and swish it to the side. Did she need to pack her jeans? Pull the string again, and don't forget to maneuver the hand. Did she need to put on her coat? Not yet. Sarah opened the bottom dresser drawer and knelt on the floor. She reached in and pulled out her cape dress. It was a mess. The wrinkles had shriveled it into a knotted wad. She stood and shook the garment out, holding it before her and staring at it as if discovering it for the first time. Without thinking, she brought it close and buried her face in it, inhaling sharply. The scent of crisply washed sheets and the aroma of freshly baked bread filled her nose. She had no idea whether the smells were really there or whether her jumbled brain had fabricated them. No matter. The familiar fragrance triggered something deep within her, and she began to tremble. Without a word, she laid the dress on the bed and shed her English clothes, plucking them off like so much refuse. Then she picked up the crumpled garment and pulled it over her head, letting it fall about her, gently touching her calves. Eric inhaled. Please, Sarah, please. Can't we talk about this? Sarah began pinning up her long, thick hair. She turned to gaze at him. We were wrong. I was wrong. I thought my dad was insane. He wasn't. He stepped to her and took her hands. So, let's figure this out. Please, Sarah. She felt herself weaken then. Her dying dream took a gasping breath and resurrected itself enough to call her name. Do you want this baby, Eric? She held her breath. This was the moment. This was the pivotal moment when everything could shift. When hope could be reborn. The silence stretched between them with crushing agony. He didn't answer. Nor did he need to. She saw it on his face. And in that devastating moment, the last vestige of hope seeped from her, and she faltered next to the bed, ready to fall. I didn't think so, she said. Sarah, I love you. She worked to breathe. She worked to make her body move. And then it did. She dug in her bag until she found her cap. With expert quickness, she had it in place over her low bun. I love you, too. What are you going to do? Not this, she thought. Not this. Her baby deserved better. Her baby deserved the best. Her breath caught and a sharp pain pierced her chest as the truth roared through her mind. My baby deserves Annie. The awareness rushed over Sarah. The knowing. The conviction. Perhaps she'd grown up in the last 24 hours. Perhaps she was a different person now. She didn't know yet. She rammed a loose bobby pin more snugly into her hair. Her firm intent to leave her Amish family shriveled, and in its place came a whisper of hope. A faint, tremulous hope that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't burned all her bridges. She wanted Annie. That she knew with no doubts. She was finished packing now. She took up her bag, but Eric grabbed it from her and carried it to the living room himself. She followed, picking up her cape from the hallway and slipping it on. "I don't know where to take you," Eric said. "Back to Ohio?" She paused. Would Annie still be there? Or would she have come back to Hollybrook? How long had it taken Annie to inform her parents of her absence? What would they have advised Annie to do? And just like that, she knew. Her dad would have asked Annie to stay in Ohio for a few days in hopes that Sarah would come back. And he would have been right. For she was going back. She opened the door to the cabin, the place she'd thought would be her new home, and walked into the frigid air toward the car. Eric ran ahead of her, throwing her bag in the back seat and opening her door for her. With his hand on the handle, he paused, searching her face. She looked into his eyes and saw an overwhelming grief, but there was something else there, too. Relief. Stark relief. He was glad they were leaving. He was glad she was going back to her family. He wanted out. He leaned down until his warm breath fluttered over Sarah's chilled face. And then he touched his lips to hers in a heartbreaking kiss. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," he whispered, and his voice caught so that he barely got the words out. She sucked in air, and her heart constricted. "We tried." "Not hard enough," he said, and his lips trembled. For a quick moment, she thought he would fall against her, but he stiffened. "We can go back inside." She searched his face for some indication that he meant it. Anything. A glimmer of hope. A pleading for affirmation. But there was nothing. He was shaking now, and he blinked hard. No. It wouldn't work. He let out his breath in a long pointed sigh. "But what will you do?" "I'll figure it out." But she already had figured it out. She was going to obey her father's wishes. And it was going to work. It would be all right. She slid into the passenger seat, and Eric shut her door. It closed with a finality that echoed through the car. She leaned her head against the back of the seat and closed her eyes. God? She began to pray. She doubted God would listen, but it was habit, ingrained in her from her first breath as a wee baby. "God? Are you still there? I need help." Eric was in the car now, turning the ignition. The motor roared to life, and he backed the car up. Within seconds, they were on the road heading east. Eric reached over and grasped her hand. "You'll be okay?" She nodded. "Jaw. I'll be okay." And it was true. She would be okay. And perhaps, someday, better than okay. She glanced at Eric. And so would he. She pressed her hands against her stomach. And so would the baby. And that was most important thing of all. The end. Thank you for listening to Escaping Acres Corner by Brenda Maxfield. Book 3 in the Annie's story series, Sarah's Return, will be coming soon. Watch for it. You can be assured that all of Brenda's books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Brenda Maxfield, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Brenda Maxfield Amish Romance.